Let me start today with a quote by famed author Frank Herbert, best known for the classic Dune series. In quotes, governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly toward that's easy for me to say, aristocratic forms. No government in history has been known to evade this pattern. And as the aristocracy develops, governments tend more and more to act exclusively in the interests of the ruling class, whether that class be hereditary royalty, oligarchs of financial empires, or entrenched bureaucracies. Governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly toward aristocratic forms. In Canada, we've arrived at that, and it's even more so in the States. Of course, every member of the power elites in this country, from politicians, captains of industry, organized labor, and sadly, way too many in the media, would vehemently disagree. But of course they would. They're on the receiving end. They're the power elites. They're the aristocracy. You know, I read and listen to a ton of mainstream media, economists, and where I part company with every single commentator and academic is that they see the Senate spending problems associated with Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin and all the others as unique, instead of a blatant reflection of not just the Senate, but the entire system of government that's run first and foremost for the political class. I mean, it would be a big mistake to focus on the revelations regarding the utter contempt for tax dollars reflected in those loose spending rules in the Senate without understanding that the degree of personal entitlement so evident in Mike Duffy's spending is the norm throughout government, not the exception. This is the system. Think about this. Federal government projected $29.4 billion deficit, 3 times higher than Mr. Trudeau's ironclad promise. So you'd think, at the very least, somebody would be making a little symbolic belt-tightening effort. But no, Mr. Trudeau decides instead that this is the year, this is the time, that each MP should get an additional $59,690 for office expenses. That's on top of the current budget of $288,450. That total, $346,000 plus. Then they get also, by the way, additional travel increase and per diem expenses. Really, this is the time? What benefit do you as a taxpayer get from that increase? How can anyone avoid the underlying attitude is that belt tightening is for the little people, not politicians? I mean, it's outrageous when you think of it. Really? Now's the time to increase MPs' expense accounts? And keep in mind, as we've just proven in the Senate, there is no accountability. The Auditor General has been prevented by the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP from auditing MPs' expenses for over a generation. Roadblocks. Can't do it. You have to understand that being an MP with all the perks, and this is something, again, in your daily walk of life you may not get, but being an MP with all the perks that go with it is as good as it gets for virtually every politician in their life. Not one of them has experienced this level of opulence before reaching Ottawa. Their massive office budgets guarantee they're surrounded by a staff that are there to meet their every need, starting with telling them how important they are. These are the dukes and duchesses of Canada. You know the Speaker of the House gets? He's getting an extra $193,000 plus. He's already over $1 million. So I guess somebody didn't sat down and says, that's the right number, $193,029. Couldn't do it on $175,000 extra. So he's going to be at $1.58 million. The Conservative leader gets an extra $725,000 plus. Their total, $4.35 million. NDP, $337,000 plus. New total for their office expense, that's the leader, their office expense, $2 million plus. I'm not suggesting there's no need for office expenses, but when the deficit's exploding past all promises, there's no need for doing this now. I'll guarantee no one has done a cost-benefit analysis of those extra tax dollars. But to my point, a huge chunk of that money goes to treating them like aristocrats. The elitism doesn't stop there. Did you see the $96 million earmarked in the latest budget? And it's going to go to 582 First Nations chiefs and for consulting with the federal government over the next 5 years how to spend the additional $8.4 billion in the budget. Do you know that works out to $170,000 per chief? This is on top of their salaries and expense accounts. And some of those salaries are outrageous, as the Transparency Act that the Trudeau government has now eliminated revealed last year. But my point is that not a cent went to those living in poverty on reserves. This is elitist vote buying, plain and simple. This is the attitude that dominates Ottawa. Expense accounts, lifestyles, private medicine for MPs, Mr. Duffy's personal trainer. It's all an attitude of entitlement that permeates government. Mr. Trudeau took a small army, 44 people with him, for a 3-day visit to Washington. Hotel, transportation, meals. I mean, we're talking his wife's parents had to make that one, nannies. But you're missing the point if you think I'm aiming it at Prime Minister Trudeau or Mr. Harper before him, Paul Martin before him. I'm talking about the culture of Ottawa. But the much more expensive side, by the way, for taxpayers rests with money going to those with political connections. I mean, my goodness, the federal government's about to hand over $1 billion plus to the politically connected Bombardier family. They've already got $1.3 billion from the Quebec government, another $1.5 billion in help from Quebec Pension Fund. But keep in mind that $1 billion from the Prime Minister Trudeau's government to the politically connected Bombardier family. You know what that represents? It's the average total income tax paid by 138,000 Canadians. Tax dollars handed over by one branch of the Quebec aristocracy, the Trudeaus, to another, the Bombardiers. Now, this is the 83rd time Bombardier will receive government help, so I think it's very tough to argue that it's not business as usual. Earlier this month, the CBC reported that the Ontario Liberal government's biggest corporate donor, the privately held company, Greenfield Specialty Alcohols, they received $163 million in subsidies from the Ontario Liberals since 2007. Oh, and look at this. The Globe's Adrian Morrow points it out. Greenfield's government lobbyist is the former Liberal cabinet minister, John Wilkinson, who co-chaired Kathleen Wynne's leadership campaign. I mean, this stuff writes itself. But the majority of Canadians not only don't get it, but vote for more of the same. Canadians always rail against a two-tiered system. Well, by any financial measure, we've got one. The political class and the rest of us. I can't believe we won't wake up because it's only going to get worse.